Hey there, and welcome to this series of lessons in After Effects. This is on keying, rotoscoping, and transfer modes. Like I said, inside of After Effects. And we're going to start with this first set on keying. And what is keying? Keying is very easy to do inside of After Effects if you know what you're doing. And it's easy to get an initial key, but it's a little bit more challenging to get a refined key. So let's start with this simple example here. In this example, I've got some clouds that are just kind of moving, they're moving footage, just kind of going by the camera. And I've also got this green screen footage here of a jet that goes across the screen. So this is a CG render of a jet over green. In a case like this, it's typically going to be a pretty perfect key because this is a CG render. When you're shooting something over green, a lot of times you can get things you have to deal with, which can be a little more challenging, which we'll look at here in a couple more lessons. But what is going to be challenging about this particular shot is this cockpit up here because it's glass. And I'll go ahead and stop and back it up here. But you can see that we see through the cockpit and we see some green through there. So that's what has to be figured out, but it's actually very easy to do. So what we're going to do to key inside of After Effects, all you have to do is go to Effect, Keying, and you're going to go down to Keylight. There's a few different ways that you can key. I'm going to focus more on Keylight so that you can really understand how it works, but we will get into a little bit on Luma keying as well. So for Keylight, all you do is you apply the effect like so, and then you just pick the screen color, little eyedropper here, come over here and just click, and boom, look at that key. It almost looks perfect. And to an untrained eye, you think it is perfect. It's like, oh, I can, the background's completely gone. I'm good to go. But if you look very closely up in here, you're going to see it's not such a perfect key. And you'll really notice it when you play this back on larger screens and you start seeing some artifacting happening in here. If I back this playhead up here, it's even a little bit hard to see here on our playback, but it is there. And the reason I know it's there is because of what's inside Keylight here. So by default, it's always going to show you the final result, which we see right here. This is the default. So I'll reset it. You come in, you click, and there's your key. That's what Keylight is made to be, very simple, straightforward. But inside of Keylight, there's a lot of options for really going in and correcting things. But I find that for the most part, you don't really have to mess with too much inside of here. But I am going to show you what I typically mess with. So what you can do is you can go into where it says final result. There's some different options inside of here. There is the source, which is our keyed footage. There's the source alpha, if there is an alpha channel. This one does not have an alpha channel. There is the corrected source, which we see here. And this is actually where you start seeing some of the things happening. So inside of here, you can see it doesn't look quite right? As we move down further into this, you're going to start seeing more things that don't look quite right. Screen matte is what I'm going to focus on the most. And you can see some fringy artifacting going on here. And that's what we want to get rid of. If you have a mask, you'll see that there, inside, outside mask, which you set those up here and here. We have the combined matte, which again, you can see some artifacting going on here. We have the status, intermediate result, which there you can really see the green. And we have the final result, which pulls that green out, and there we go. So if I jump back here to screen matte, what I'm going to do is the two things I typically mess with are clip black and clip white. Okay. Sometimes you will play around a little bit with screen pre-blur, and that kind of comes into play when you are dealing with a key that maybe has some wrinkles in the curtain. Maybe you see some wrinkles coming across here, very slight wrinkles. If you use the screen blur, that is going to kind of blur that background image and make the key a little easier to get. So again, I'm going to switch back here to screen mat, make sure my Keylight is on, and I'm just going to start. I put in very low values to start, and you see right when I put 5, you saw some things disappear here. So you see those artifacts right there? As soon as I put 5 in there, see how those went away? I can also jump down here to intermediate results, and I can see it looks a little cleaner. Let's go back to combined mat. Yeah, a lot of those artifacts are gone. Screen mat, here we go. So I'll go up to 10. And I saw a little bit more of the edge went away here. If I undo that, you can see there's a little bit more there. You can also see it pulled some of the mat here over the plane. And I'll actually go a little bit more. I find that 15 seemed to work pretty well for this one. If I go back here to combined mat, it's looking pretty good. If I go back to my final result here, so that's with a clip black of 15. Pay attention to this right here. If I go back to 0, you can see up in here especially, it just got a little bit more muddy. If I undo it, it's just a little more clear through here. If I go back to 0, you can't really see the artifacting going on here. But sometimes what I will do when I'm keying something is I'll add a solid. I'll make it the comp size, and I make it a bright red. And that's so I can easily see artifacting if it happens to be going on back here. So if I turn this back to 0, so right there, immediately I saw some artifacting pop back in. Undo it back to 15 and watch this go away. You see that? So just a couple things you just need to be aware of when you're keying. That looks pretty good. I'll turn off the solid. Go back to 100%, and I will preview this. And it looks really nice. Something else you always want to keep an eye out for is what's called spill light. And that's where the green is kind of reflecting in the material in front of it that you're shooting. Because this is a CG render, we don't see that. The CG render was probably added to the green screen. And this was just a way for someone to get stock footage. Maybe if they don't know what alpha channels are, if they get it keyed, then it's easy to key and they can just use it that way. So there we go. There is our first keyed shot. It looks pretty good to me. Yeah, it looks really nice. So you can see there, that was pretty simple to do. Let's move into the next example. Okay, so for this next keying example, I'm not going to actually key this shot out. So I'm just frozen on a single frame here. And if we were to key this particular frame out, we would still have to roto around this hand to remove some of these tracking markers. So I have the mask here, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn that mask on. And let's just pretend, actually let's subtract that. Let's pretend that this is a key, okay? Because this is what happens. When you key this out or roto this out, you're still left with what is called spill, okay? And you can see the spill from the green light on the screen is left here on this person's hand. It's just that ambient light from the green that has projected itself onto this hand. How do you get rid of that without keying it out? Because you don't want to key this away. This is the person's hand. You want to make sure it's there. So what you do is you go back to Effect, Keying, and the very first option here is called Advanced Spill Suppressor. So remember we worked with Keylight before. Now we've got Advanced Spill Suppressor. When we apply that, watch what happens to the green. See how it immediately went away? And now it looks like the color of maybe a screen, maybe more of a blue light. So it's very quick. It's a plugin that's meant to be applied, and it immediately does its job. If you want even more control over it, you can go into Ultra mode. And Ultra mode allows you to sample the green, and I'll go ahead and turn this off, and I'll sample this green, and I'll turn the mask back to subtract, turn this on, and there you go. So now we have just a really nice, almost like a white light here. And if I want to actually remove even a little bit more green from the hand here, I can do that by turning either like the tolerance up or the desaturation up. So tolerance, if I turn this up a little bit, so there's 100% and there's 50. And you just have to really kind of be careful because you can notice that it's desaturating the entire image to do that. So you can also expand the spill range, adjust the color correction. So there you go. So there's with spill suppressor and there's without. You can see a significant difference in that green that is being projected onto the hand. A lot of times, like I said, whenever you shoot something in front of a green screen, there's typically, depending on what you're shooting, it can be a lot of spill or a little bit of spill. If you have a lot of reflective material, there's a lot of spill that happens. If the subject is, or the object is very close to the screen, a lot of spill can happen as well. Okay, so in this shot, we have man's favorite friend, the cat. So cats always make me laugh every time I see a cat. Anyways, so here we have a cat, and we've got a few things going on with this cat that can typically be very challenging with keying. One of them, the biggest one, is actually the very fine hair that you see here, the whiskers from the cat. There can be challenging to key out. And then of course, when the cat moves like that, it can typically be a problem as well. So I think this is a slow motion shot. Yeah, it is a slow motion shot. So how would I approach keying out this shot with a lot of hair? Well, let me show you how I would do this. So what I would do is I've also got a background layer applied here that I'm going to show you. So we've got this background here, and that's what we're going to put behind the cat. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up to Effect, Keying, and Keylight. And I do want to mention, of course, I have a ton of plugins. You're not going to have all these plugins. So you might see above here it says Key Correct above Keying, and you may say, well, where's my Key Correct? Where are these tools? Well, this is actually another set of plugins I've purchased separately that I occasionally use for very tough keys, but it's not something that you need to worry about. All you need to focus on is just keying. So here we have Keylight, and again, it defaults to black. And it defaults to black, I think, because so that we don't have any results when we immediately apply it. Because if it defaulted to a green, the green would disappear, but maybe it's not the right green. Every shade of green screen is going to be slightly different. So you'll actually, let's go ahead and undo that. You'll notice that this green is not quite as green as this one was. So see how that's a very vibrant green, and the green right now is more of a desaturated green. So we're going to go ahead and select the green, and we're going to get close to the subject. And there we go. And you can immediately see the artifacting that's happening right here. A lot of artifacting. That depends on your shot. It depends on the codec that was used to record your footage. It depends on how much compression is happening, all that kind of stuff. So this shot, this digital shot, seems to have quite a bit of artifacting going on, which can be very bad for us, but hopefully we'll get it sorted out. So the next thing we're going to talk about is another powerful effect inside of keying, and this is called Key Cleaner, and this thing is a godsend. Watch what happens when I click on Key Cleaner. Watch what happens up here. Just the default settings got rid of all that noise up in there. But now we can also adjust these settings and get a little bit better results. So turning that down to 5, it was at 10. And if you look, I'm looking really closely here at these edges. A lot of times with keying, you want to get very close in on your subject matter. So we'll reduce that to half, and it Just pulls out a little bit more of the artifacting that's going on. And then we're going to turn up the contrast. Let's turn it up to 10, 20. Let's go up to 25. So now it's starting to look pretty good. There's still a little bit going on in these areas here, but some of this stuff is going to be hidden once we put a background behind there. But let me show you something that you do want to do here so that we don't have to deal with like this area of the frame that's not keying out. Something like this, what we're going to do is we're actually going to mask that out. Set that to subtract. And maybe also in here. Something you need to also pay attention to when you do use masks like this, you want to make sure that your subject matter never passes through the mask. Okay, so now it's playing and I can see that I'm in the safe zone. The closest the cat gets is right in here. Yeah, and it does cut it off right there. So if we move the mask up there, we should be good to go. Some things that you need to also be aware of when adding or when looking at these edges. Like I said, this shot has a lot of fringing going on. There are things like edge color correction that can help with the edge getting cleaned up a little bit. So now we can look at with the background added in and see if some of this stuff is still really present or not. And you can see a lot of it just goes away with that background added. So what I have here is just an image. If I double click, it's just a stock image I pulled off a website. And what makes it work is obviously you don't want it to be in focus like this because the cat is completely out of focus at this point, or not. The edges of the cat are blurry. So I would go to a part here and you can see things are very blurry here along the edge, really shallow depth of field. So I found I used the fast box blur. I cranked it up to 40 and turned it on, and there you go. Typically, I would use like a camera lens blur for something like this. If I had the time to render it, it looks a little bit nicer. But for this example, it works just great. So something else I'd probably do is go into a hue and saturation. Maybe drop the saturation just a little bit. So that's -5. Yeah, it's just a teeny little bit. So that looks pretty good. There's always things that we could do to continue to make masks keying better and better. There's also additional tools available for us to, as motion designers, to improve them. But a lot of times we can get away with basic keying, like in this instance, and making it look okay. Something that I do notice. So if you go up in here and you zoom in, you're going to see right here. Now watch what happens when I turn key cleaner off. See how much more noise appears there? So something you could also do is keep key cleaner on and then increase the black just a little bit, and it brings maybe a 10 here. Yeah, that looks really nice. Help to clean up the edges just a little bit more. And by increasing that clip black just a little bit, it helps really clean up those edges and that artifacting that happened right up along the edges here. So it looks really nice. It's a good key. It'll work for us. Next, we're going to move on to the Luma key.